Thanks, Rich, and thanks to all the speakers for setting an amazing context for the things that I want to talk to you about. And what I really get to focus on in the few minutes that we have together now is the experience that we had around Proposition 71 in California, the California Stem Cell Initiative. This is a measure that was widely watched across the nation, really across the world, and that I fear sets some precedents for the adoption of future genetic and reproductive technologies that we really need to be careful about. So I want to explain what it was, what the problems with it were, and what I think the lessons that we should draw from this experience are. Now, there were a lot of people outside California, and indeed a lot of people inside California who voted for the measure, who understood it primarily as a referendum against the Bush administration's policies on stem cell research, the restrictions that Bush drew that were against deriving any new stem cell lines, even from the surplus spare embryos in the IVF clinic that Stuart was talking about just now. So people understood this as a way to sort of thumb their noses at Bush, and also as a chance to repudiate the efforts of anti-abortion rights forces to elevate the moral status of embryos. And I think this was a motivation for a lot of people who supported this initiative. But in fact, the women's health community and social justice advocates and other progressives in California were deeply divided about Proposition 71. Some actually endorsed it officially. Others, including the Center for Genetics and Society, including the 58,000-member California Nurses Association, and an ad hoc group called the Pro-Choice Alliance Against Proposition 71. All these groups strenuously opposed it. Now, all the progressive critics of the stem cell initiative actually do support embryonic stem cell research using the spare IVF embryos. And, you know, I found that I have to say that the beginning and the middle and the end of every talk I give about it, and every time I talk to a reporter about it, because it was really hard for people to make that distinction. So we support embryonic stem cell research using those IVF embryos that are, you know, with the proper informed consent, and oppose the Bush policy as too prohibitive, too restrictive. And, you know, like all other strong supporters of abortion rights, were particularly distressed by what was the obviously motivating factor of the Bush restrictions, and that was pandering to his religious right constituency. In fact, it's interesting that, and this is something that Shelley addressed, that the Bush restrictions on stem cell research represent one of the few areas in which this administration has declined to give any corporate sector pretty much whatever it wants. So, you know, compared to the anti-regulation bias, the pro-corporate bias in so many other areas of environmental and science policy, you know, this one stands out for, you know, Karl Robian reasons. Ironically, the California Stem Cell Initiative, which was widely understood as an anti-Bush thing, was extremely pro-corporate, extremely anti-regulatory measure. More than $25 million was raised in the campaign to pass it. Much of this was contributed by venture capitalists who seemed to have they had no trouble recognizing this proposition as a windfall for the corporate biotech sector. This initiative is really the wrong way. It's a model of the wrong way to support stem cell research, and a model of irresponsible development of the new human biotechnologies. So let me tell you what it does. This initiative, first of all, says that the state must sell $3 billion in bonds to fund stem cell research. And that amount, according to the state legislative analyst, is going to amount to $6 billion in costs to the state citizens to repay it once interest is figured in. It establishes a new institute that will have total control over these public funds, and it specifies very specifically the composition of the committee that will run the institute. And it actually amends the state's constitution to include a right to conduct stem cell research, explicitly including the use of the research cloning techniques that Stuart was just talking about, although it doesn't use the word cloning at all. And in fact, one of the backers of the initiative, the Nobel laureate Paul Berg, sued in court to try to prohibit the critics of this initiative from using the word cloning in their rebuttal in the ballot arguments that appeared in the voters' pamphlet. So, okay, so again, people saw this as, you know, pro-stem cell research, anti-Bush. What was wrong with it? There's so much wrong with it. It's so over-the-top problematic that it would take far more than the time we have tonight to go through it. So let me just give you a few of the points, a few of the problems. First, although the initiative was promoted and was widely understood as a project to promote better health, in fact, we think it's very likely to undermine health equity. Given the political climate in California and in the country, and the massive deficit that we already face in California, the $6 billion expense will very likely come from cuts in already frayed social programs, including public health. In addition, there are no guarantees in this initiative that any treatments that are developed as a result of the research would be affordable to the vast majority of people, and they're likely to be extraordinarily expensive. They're being promoted and sold as personalized medicine, individually tailored medicine, and this is an approach to healthcare that will actually exacerbate health disparities, and it will create a kind of designer medicine, a boutique medicine that's only available to a few. Okay, so health equity problems. Secondly, this is a project that, as the California Nurses Association put it, will permit wealthy corporate giants to hijack the benefits of the publicly funded research. The $3 billion of public money will be a boon for the biotech sector, whether or not they're able to develop any successful treatments. And if there are developments that bring financial returns, there's no requirement that any of that be returned to the Californians. Furthermore, the initiative fails completely to protect against conflicts of interest in the awarding of these huge sums of money, and this is the kind of conflicts that Shelley was talking about earlier. In fact, it sets up a situation of intense cronyism in that the committee that will govern and steer the Institute is composed, it's dominated, majority on it are representatives of biotech companies and research institutions that themselves will be the likely recipients of these grants that are distributed. So third, there's a lot of questions in this initiative around public accountability and oversight. The initiative insulates the institute that it sets up from any kind of oversight by the public or by elected officials. It allows the researchers to modify NIH regulations in areas such as informed consent and protection of research subjects as the researchers see fit. And it actually exempts the research activities from what, and I'm quoting here from the language of the initiative, it exempts it from current and future state regulations and laws. Now, I didn't know you could write an initiative like that, but they did. The initiative says that it's going to prioritize stem cell research not funded by the NIH, so that means, and it explicitly says that it's going to prioritize research cloning, somatic cell nuclear transfer, and it doesn't set up the kinds of monitoring or regulatory protection that this research cloning really, really requires. So we're looking at a situation in which, if anything like what the backers of the initiative said is going to happen, you know, we're going to cure 100 million people, they said. You know, 100 million people in the United States have diseases that will be cured by this research, is what they said. If anything like that, like, you know, give them a couple orders of magnitude, you know, for allowable exaggeration in a political campaign, still, this is going to require a huge supply, a massive supply of women's eggs. And several people have alluded to this already tonight. Where are these eggs going to come from? Who are the women that are going to be that are going to feel that a couple hundred or a couple $1,000s that's called reimbursement of expenses? Well, that's one of the things that we fear. We fear an emergence of a market in eggs that pressures on poor women, young women to provide these eggs, and the initiative sponsors had no answer to this concern. They really just didn't, they said contradictory things.